Touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
It is Tuesday evening, which means it is time to roll out a new episode of The Process, Crimson Tide Recruiting. I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on our YouTube page. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button down below so you can stay subscribed to Touchdown Alabama on YouTube, so you can stay updated on all of our content. On this episode of The Process, I want to take a look at the Tide's 2021 defensive line recruiting efforts moving forward here throughout the rest of this recruiting cycle. I have some pretty interesting updates about the Tide's recruiting efforts when it comes to this particular group I want to provide you guys with today and give my take on what it means for the Tide's 2021 recruiting class. So I want to focus my effort and focus this episode of The Process on that. But before I get a chance to dive into that, I do have a couple of recruiting updates to hit you guys with, keep you guys updated on everything that is going on in the world of Alabama football recruiting. But before we dive into that, football season has started all over the country when it comes to high school football season, and since the SEC kicked off its season on last weekend, football has started in the college ranks as well. And when you look at high school football starting all around the country, a lot of Tide commits have been able to compete. So before I dive into those recruiting updates, I am going to roll into the top 3 plays from last weekend when it comes to Alabama commits. So with that being said, let's get the process started. We are now going to roll into a couple of highlights from Tide commits from this past weekend. We are going to start with the Tide's 2021 4-star defensive tackle commit, Tim Keenan III, as he is going to blow up a center on this particular play, knocks the center into the quarterback, and even makes the tackle on the running back, as he was very disruptive throughout this game on Friday night, as I did get a chance to attend the game where Ramsey High School defeated Pinson Valley 14-13. And after this game, shortly after, Tim Keenan posted this video to Twitter stating that if you go under center with him lining up at defensive tackle and nose guard, you are being disrespectful. And he shows that he takes that disrespect to heart, and he takes it out on opposing offenses, their center, their quarterback, and even their running back, with him making a very, very explosive play on Friday night. One of the Tide commits here in this 2021 recruiting class. We're going to stay with the Tide's 2021 class here for this next play, but we are going to go to Florida to check out the Tide's 2021 5-star wide receiver commit, AJ Hall, as he is going to track down a guy who picks up a fumble after they forced a fumble on AJ Hall and Bloomingdale's quarterback. He's almost basically in the open, but here comes AJ Hall, hawking him down, showing that great closing speed, showing off that nice stride he has at that wide receiver position, with him being a 6'3" guy. With plays like that, you see why we at TouchdownAlabama.com have him listed as a 5-star recruit in our own independent recruiting rankings. We are going to stay with the 5-star for this last play, as he is going to go up and get the football with time expiring to help Bloomingdale pull off a huge win, as he scores the game-winning touchdowns with 0 seconds on the clock. A very exciting play for one of the Tide's top commits here, one of the 3 wide receiver commits from the state of Florida. A lot of great action happened on last weekend. We are looking forward for this weekend, as high school football across the country is beginning. In some states, like the state of Alabama, is basically halfway done, and when you look at it already being past the midway portion when it comes to the Tides, when it comes to the state of Alabama. I mean football, high school football, but a lot of great action is to come, as we will here at The Process drop highlights with so much going on. Continue to drop some of the top plays from Tide commits over the weekend. But as always, I will always want to keep you guys updated with recruiting updates when it comes to Alabama football. That is what we are going to go to next. Let's dive into a couple of recruiting updates here, starting with the Tide's 2021 5-star athlete target, JaQuincy McKinstry, out of Pinson Valley High School in Pinson, Alabama. I recently got a chance to catch up with McKinstry after Pinson Valley was defeated by the Tide's 2021 4-star defensive tackle commit Tim Keenan in Ramsey High School on Friday night. And when I got a chance to interview McKinstry, he talked a lot about the latest in his recruitment, of course, still considering the Tide, LSU, along with Auburn, but he also talked about his relationship with the Tide starting true freshman defensive back Malachi Moore and how excited he was to see Moore start for the Tide on Saturday. Be sure to check out that article over at touchdownalabama.com, as McKinstry is one of the Tide's top targets moving forward here in this 2021 recruiting class. Something pretty interesting about the Tide's push for that particular 5-star recruit, with Moore becoming a true freshman starter for the Tide on this season. Moving forward here, looking at the Tide's 2021 recruiting class and looking at what their future may hold, one guy who they are also recruiting as a defensive back is Sage Ryan, a Louisiana product who recently released a top 3 and included the Tide. He posted on Twitter recently that he wants to cut that list down to a top 2, so a top 2 could come out soon. The Tide could be listed in that top 2 as he is one of their top defensive back targets here in this 2021 recruiting class at the moment. I also recently caught up with 2021 4-star offensive lineman and Alabama commit James Brockermeyer to talk about him and his brother, of course, Tommy Brockermeyer, the fellow Alabama commit as well. Talk about them starting their senior seasons at All Saints Episcopal School as they were involved in a shootout on Thursday night in the first game of their season. They were able to come out with a win 70-50. I got a chance to talk with James about that particular game, his thoughts on the Tide picking up a huge win over Missouri, how they use their offensive linemen. Be sure to check out that article over at touchdownalabama.com as well when you get the opportunity. All of those articles are subscriber-only articles, so be sure to pick up that subscription at touchdownalabama.com as well. I also recently dropped a new edition of Justin's Recruiting Bites. In Justin's Recruiting Bites, basically, I drop a couple of notes about the latest in Tide football recruiting, another subscriber-only benefit, but I recently dropped one on yesterday, and I talked about the Tide's 2021 4-star defensive end recruiting efforts, which I will dive into a little bit more in the next segment, but be sure to check out that over at touchdownalabama.com as well. But as I said earlier in the show, I want to use this episode of The Process to talk about the Tide's defensive end and defensive line overall recruiting efforts here in this 2021 recruiting cycle moving forward. As I said at the top of the show today, I want to talk about some recent developments when it comes to the Tide recruiting defensive linemen here in this 2021 recruiting cycle. When you look at Alabama's current 2021 recruiting class, they have 3 verbal commitments from 2021 defensive tackles. When you look at Tim Keenan and Quinn Barnes, along with Damon Payne, they also have commitments from a couple of defensive ends. When you look at Monkel Goodwine, along with Dallas Turner. When you look at the Tide's recruiting board, they are most likely done with defensive tackles with those 3 guys verbally committed. But the interesting part lies when it comes to defensive ends, because the Tide could add 2 more guys here in this 2021 recruiting class at their defensive end group. And when you look at their current recruiting board with their targets that are listed, a couple of defensive ends are in the mix, including Thomashe Adelie, who is a Texas product, along with another fellow Texas product, and Shemar Turner out of DeSoto High School in Texas. You also have guys like Shambrick Jackson, a 4-star defensive end out of Boone High School in Florida, along with another guy who should be listed as a 4-star recruit in my mind, but most recruiting sites have him listed as a 3-star recruit at the moment, in Christian Zachary out of Carrollton High School by the way of Carrollton, Georgia. When you look at the Tide's recruiting board, I recently got a chance to talk with Shambrick Jackson, and he told me that the Tide is not recruiting him as hard as they once were. When you look at how the Tide has recruited Shambrick Jackson, they look pretty interested for a good portion of his recruitment. Nick Saban was Zoom calling him. He got offered on a visit in 2019. The Tide's coaching staff contact with them seemed to be consistent, but at the moment he said it feels as if they are not recruiting him as hard as they once were. Of course, a lot of factors could go into that, especially when you look at the current recruiting landscape. I think a lot of different things have impacted 2021 recruiting, including the NCAA choosing to basically ignore eligibility during this season. So this year basically does not count to your eligibility when it comes to college football. So I think that impacts recruiting. Not saying that impacts Shambrick Jackson's recruitment, but I think it impacts numbers at certain schools across the nation, with the NCAA deciding to do that. And when I also got a chance to talk with another target here for the Tide when it comes to defensive ends, I caught up with Christian Zachary, who still feels the Tide is one of his top schools. He feels as if they're right there at the top of his recruitment. Of course, he is set to announce his commitment actually on October 15th. The Tide's coaching staff has been in contact with them. Sal Sunseri, the Tide's outside linebacker coach, has been in constant contact with this Georgia product as they are still recruiting him heading into his October 15th decision. And it looks as if they can land Zachary. All depends on, at this moment, is if he's a take for them, if they feel they want to take his commitment on October 15th, when there's a possibility that Tamashe Adilier and Shemar Turner could still, most likely will still be on the board. And I think that is something to just consider, especially if they feel they have a good chance with those guys, because I feel that Tamashe Adilier and Shemar Turner are two of their top targets. Then you have 5-star defensive end JT Tuamola out of Washington, who is still in contact with the Tide's coaching staff, as several West Coast programs are trying to attempt to keep him on the West Coast. But he is the guy that the Tide's coaching staff is going to continue to push for here in this 2021 recruiting class, along with Adilier and Turner. Of course, they still look to be in a great position with Adilier, going back to when he decided to verbally commit to Ohio State. Before that, he always said that Alabama was at the top of his recruitment, and I think they are in a great position with him at the moment. Shemar Turner is another guy who is still considering the Tide, with him having them in his top 5 at this very moment. So the question is, how many? I think they will look to take 2 defensive ends, but who exactly will that be remains to be seen, with some uncertainty definitely circling around college football visits, because you are not able to take any visits right now due to the NCAA dead period. But on this episode of The Process, I just wanted to talk about that, just bring that to Alabama fans' attention, as the defensive end group here for the Tide is going to be one of the more interesting groups moving forward here over the next couple of months for the Tide in the 2021 recruiting cycle.